Welcome to Charting Change in Legal. I'm Ari Kaplan. I'm an analyst that covers the legal industry, and I'm here with my co-host.
Caroline Hill. Hi, everyone. Caroline. I'm the editor of Legal
Hello,
Life.
Caroline. Yes, tell us who you are. Forgive me.
I'm I'm the editor of Legal IT Insider. Minor
Well,
detail, Ari. It
well
doesn't really matter.
done. Wow. Anyway, I really like your hat,
Thank you so
uh,
much. Thank you.
and it's great to
It's
talk
very
to you today.
cold in New York. It's not as cold in the UK, but in near London. But bringing some bright vibes with this bright pink hat, and I know it's absolutely freezing where you are.
Yes, and it's Groundhog Day, and apparently some groundhog somewhere saw that it's going to be 6 more weeks of winter, but apparently he's an unreliable groundhog. So uh, we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I
I
hope it warms up for you a little bit. 'Cause it's like minus a gazillion.
Yeah, certainly I have to say on this Groundhog Day, we're not experiencing Groundhog Day in legal. I feel like there's not like a repeat of things, although in some respect, you're seeing a lot of similar conversations already start, you know, to the year, just in terms of uh, technology or how people are right sizing their teams or
Yeah.
ways that they are engaging new roles to support some activities. And as always, I find it exciting. It's also a month or so before legal week, which
Yeah,
is
I booked my flight. I cannot
there you
wait.
go. And it's also at a new venue this year, so
Yeah,
everyone is essentially going to legal week for the first time,
yeah,
which
true.
gives kind of a disadvantage to those of us who've been going for 2 decades or something. But
Although I
uh,
think we needed something fresh, I think it's going to be something nice for everybody to have a new venue at Legal Week and somewhere hopefully a bit more space, a bit more meeting space, for those people who've been going for years. I think, Legal Week would be the first to say that they sort of outgrew that venue. So I think the exhibition hall is all on one floor, which is going to be awesome because if for people familiar with the conference in the Hilton, it's been divided by 3 floors. So people like me with a really terrible sense of direction are challenged right from the outset as to how to find people, particularly if you're having meetings.
and you would always be running from place to place and up and down and the escalator, and you'd see someone on the escalator. And so I agree. I think that I'm sure they'll do a great job, and I'm sure it's going to be a really fun event. But the idea of everyone starting at the same point is going to be fun. We'll all kind of be experiencing it for the first time together, which I look forward to. Also, I will miss running in Central Park, but to be honest, even as a New Yorker, I used to get lost, and I'm imagining that running along the West Side Highway will be much easier, just out and back. So it'll be fun,
It'd
and
be nice
hopefully
to see a new area, Hudson Yards. Like
it's
it's
beautiful
gonna,
part of the city. It's
yeah.
just wonderfully well developed, and there are lots of restaurants and places, I think, for people to meet. So, and it's also fairly well situated to mass transit. I think it'll be
Yeah.
good. I think people will be
It's
exciting.
gonna
So,
be fun. But going to your point about is it, are things moving fast? Are they new? Are they the same? I feel like that the start of this year, it's been fascinating. There's been some really cool, really fast moving new stuff already, I think. Not brand new this year, but themes from last year that where it's moving fast. Like, so I'll give you an example. I was just talking to Helder Santos, who is one of the most senior heads of IT at Bird and Bird in the UK. And he was talking about vibe coding and how the firm, it's on my Inside View podcast, which will come out shortly. But he was talking about vibe coding and kind of handing over to, obviously there's governance around it and there's a process and all, there's approval and all of this kind of stuff, but like enabling fee owners particularly who have had all this knowledge in their heads and previously had to potentially connect with a translator. Back in the day we'd be like, how on earth do you connect IT and the knowledge source? But actually, this takes that away, right? But then with that, and it's really cool. So they're using Betty Blocks as their platform. They were one of the earliest Lagora users, and they're now sort of expanding out the platform, what that looks like, and how to sort of give real creative license to their fee earners and use all of that knowledge in their head whilst creating this governance platform. And Helder was the first to say, actually, this is moving really quick, like, and there's, and not, and he wasn't pretending to have all the answers. He's saying, you've just got to go with it because actually the clients are expecting you to move fast. Fee earners want to do this. If you, going back to this conversation we've had a million times about if you don't facilitate whatever the new thing is, then there's a risk, obviously, that they'll go and do it themselves somewhere else. But that's kind of cool. I mean, this is something brand new, I think. This idea of we used to call it shadow IT, really, probably didn't we? But now it's like creating rules around. It's not shadow IT, but you know what I mean. Like I think this is a fun new thing. There are other areas we may come onto where I feel like it's just the same conversation again and again. But this I feel like is quite exciting. It's quite new.
When I was practicing, I was lucky to work at a firm that gave you billable credit for business development activities. So if you went to a conference or if you wrote an article, you could bill that time and actually it would be credited towards your bonus. And it was fairly unusual. Firms did that, but not a lot of them. And I felt lucky that I worked at a firm like that. It will be very interesting to see what kind of credit you'll receive for these kinds of activities because they will certainly elevate your practice. And the clients are expecting new ways of approaching legal work. And if a firm, and Helda is obviously a globally recognized leader and a visionary in terms of how you can transform legal practice. And so it's not surprising to me that he's at the forefront of this, but it'll be interesting. I know that some firms offer some type of billable credit for innovation activities generally, but it'll be interesting to see if you start developing things that empower a team or enhance the client relationship. Is there something more that you would receive? Because time is really the issue. Dedicating the time is an important element here.
I wish we'd had this conversation before I spoke to him because I did not ask that. And now I'm like, I wish I had asked that. Like, yeah, it's a super good point. Yeah, I think that, I mean, this is my first, I know vibe coding's been, as a concept, it's been around since the sort of spring, I think it was, of 25. But so it's actually really new, that this is not, and this was my first law firm conversation about vibe coding. I don't know whether it's something that's come up for you, but it's really cool to speak to somebody who's doing it in practice. My kind of focus, I should have asked that, and I will come back when we next speak. Oh, because we're going to catch up again. But my focus was more on how, like, basically how they're doing it, what kind of output there's already been, and a little bit about that whole new risk appetite that firms are having to get comfortable with, and how you still put the governance in place, right? So you risk and compliance teams are having to move with the times, right? And that doesn't mean to say, I'm not suggesting for a second that they're throwing out their guardrails. But it's like, how do they manage all these new moving parts, right? And not just from a compliance perspective, but like, you don't want to end up with a million different tools that actually the person who created it moves off, and then we've had years of buy versus build, and sometimes with build, it becomes unruly and unmaintained, and actually, well, there's so many interesting facets to it. That was kind of the route that I took.
Well, vibe coding actually came up at my Legal Tech Mafia breakfast in January. And this buy versus build conversation also was part of it. And the conversation focused on building up to a point. So vibe coding to the point of developing a prototype and then sending it to more of an expert, the expert team at the organization or an external support system. But clearly that's important. I still think that we have to somehow find a way to incentivize dedicating the time, like self-teaching, in the same way that, if you have a leaky pipe or you have a light that's out, you immediately go onto YouTube, find that I have a leaky pipe and it sounds like this and it's dripping every other second. And, there's almost always a video on that. So it's like, oh, use this special tape or tighten it with this particular tool. And I think that the same is true if we could somehow figure out how to if have a repository of these sort of lessons and then figure out, well, why don't you just try? Or I guess people are using their generative AI tool for that now.
Yeah, and I think they are doing that. I think there's an element of building a community around it. I think that's super important, and in order to share knowledge and also prevent too much overlap, like but yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think there's an excitement still around this, the fact that you just can do it, and that perhaps, the interesting thing, I suppose, literally just talking off the top of my head, like I suppose at one point people would create a startup, right? Like we've seen the genesis of a million different startups from exactly this sort of thing. Oh, hey, I've got something in my day-to-day life which I can't solve for with existing technology. That's how half the startups that we know in legal tech have evolved. So what's quite interesting, I suppose, is that they're keeping pet people in house. But you're right. Then it comes to, what does that look like? How do you reward them? Because actually, why not just go off and do your own thing?
Well, also there are more and more examples of law firms that have spun out technology that was built internally to solve a
Mm.
very specific problem. And so organizations, I'm confident, are thinking about that as well. Maybe there is a real opportunity here, especially given the interest in legal tech. I will say that this concept of vibe coding, as as enthusiastic as the legal community seems to be this year about it, it differs between law firms and law departments. I just was lucky to host a dinner for senior leaders, senior in-house counsel in Houston, and for a large number of law department leaders. And that that conversation is not about vibe coding. That conversation is not about some coming up with some innovative way to create something that transforms the workflow. It's really about getting the work done, figuring out how to do the work with fewer resources, figuring out how to navigate changing rate structures, even some of the basics about using technology to do more of the work internally. But the idea of vibe coding is much more advanced for folks like Helder,
I,
and not necessarily for folks who are like really in the trenches trying to just manage the significant volume of work with fewer resources.
It's so funny you should say that, because when I said about there's pockets where it's really not, it's the same conversation. This is exactly where what I was thinking. So I'm writing up about a conference, an in-house conference that actually there was a mixture of in-house and private practice, but the emphasis was on the client and solving the client problem. And actually, a lot of them were not talking about technology. They were talking about, this was a United Lex conference, which I have to confess I'm really been slow to write up about, but I had a chance to reflect back on it because I've been writing quite a lot about the in-house, in-house, and some of the trends and perhaps work shifting more towards in-house this year, which I think is going to happen. So I had a chance to sort of revisit that conference, and actually a lot of the conversations in the panels were about, working in partnership. That was the theme of the conference, to be fair. So it was kind of engineered a little bit towards that. But actually, then you're right. Then they're just trying to solve, to a certain extent, the same problem that they've always been trying to solve. And there is a tech solution to it. But and it's interesting because we've seen HSBC, a huge bank, they recently caused a lot of interest on our site, for starters, and amongst many, by selecting Harvey. But actually, a lot of teams are having to do what they can with existing tools. They're not necessarily being able to go out and get a big legal AI platform. It's the same old thing. They're going to have to, a lot of them are looking at Copilot, aren't they? They're using Microsoft. They're having to use existing tools and work out how they can do the best that they can with that tool, because for the time being, for certain, they're a cost, not a profit center. It's the same thing that we've had for years. That hasn't changed.
And they are much more familiar with some of the basics and are sharing ideas for using generative AI to create policies, to identify IP infringement, to understand the regulatory landscape. There are lots of new ways that these teams are leveraging it. And in fact, the enthusiasm and acceptance of it is dramatically different now than it was even just a few months ago. And someone actually mentioned that AI is aging in dog years. So there's this accelerated development cycle where we think it's years, but it's actually just months. And the penetration is growing so rapidly. You are correct. Many of the people that I'm speaking to are using some enterprise level tool like Copilot rather than a law department specific tool, which is not to say that that wouldn't be great. It wouldn't be appropriate. In this instance, at this time, they're still trying to get their hands around how to take advantage of the enterprise level tool. And also, I'm pretty sure it's the budget is on the IT side of the enterprise rather than legal. So there's an advantage to using it. But the the most important thing that I would say to our listener is that it's really essential to be in the room, whatever that room is, whether it's the room of law firm leaders, law department leaders, whoever your constituency is, be in the room and have this conversation and ask the questions, listen and share, because that seems to be the most potent way to drive your team forward, to drive your own career forward. And I was actually really honored to be in that room with those leaders because they were sharing important elements of their workflow that I could see their peers making notes because they were like, we don't do that. And that's a great idea. I hadn't even thought of that. Wow. And then start asking each other questions. And that's a really important way to learn and to drive your organization ahead.
I mean, that's so awesome. And I think that community is going to be a big part of this year because things are moving so fast. And you, it's not even that we could have got used to it, really. It's just moving quicker and quicker. And I do think that there's going to be an emphasis this year on, there's been an emphasis for the last couple of years on meeting and talking, but I feel like well-being this year and networking, entering into these types of conversations is more important than ever. That community, we're going to be trying, we've got some plans in place to try and help build community around the things that we're doing. And that there's a reason for that. Partly it's self-serving because we obviously want to promote what we're doing. But a lot of it is also recognition that there's more need for people to come together, even if it's not for a work thing. It's just to come together to talk, probably for, to share ideas, but just actually to kind of support one another. Because I really do feel like already people are saying, wow, this is quick.
Well, it's also, as you say, from a personal standpoint, there are peers in our space who are having to shift careers or jobs. The growth and development of technology is not all positive for everyone. There's definitely a point that needs to be acknowledged where in some instances it's replacing certain tasks, it's replacing certain roles. And obviously people are constantly talking about this idea, oh, technology is not going to replace people, and they have all these reasons why it will not. However, it's starting to, you're seeing this in the mainstream news, just about large corporations reducing lots and lots of team members because of technology or automation. And the idea of gathering and being resources to one another is again another really powerful way to build community, especially at a moment where people need that connection.
Yeah, you won't comment on this, Ari, because you're Switzerland. But like for me, I'm like, who's in charge of this? Like, because it's not the regulator.
Well,
It's
it's these are hard decisions. I'm not in any way one of the things that some of the individuals that I've spoken to are talking about with respect to AI is using different tools to soften language, to make conversations easier somehow, and as a real aid to guide in these instances. And I think that that's anything that can soften this process is going to be better, but also to provide resources to push people in the right direction. But we can all do that. You find anytime I hear of something, I share it with people who I know are looking and try to make an introduction. I think just that effort multiplied by each of us can really make a difference.
so. What do you think? Before we wrap up, what do you think? Are the topics for? I haven't actually. You'll probably know, Ari, because you're organized. But like the topics for Legal Week, I reckon MCP will be a big focus. If not in the sessions, then in people's conversations. That's something that keeps coming up time and time again. Like how people are going to use MCP to connect their platforms. I've got a really cool podcast coming up with the head of innovation at or transformation at one of the really big corporates, talking about the work that they're doing around MCP and connecting their platforms, which is going to be really fun.
I
Um,
think people are going to be doing a lot of reconnaissance of the physical space at Legal Week. I'm actually even toying with the idea of going there and trying to figure out where will I tell people to meet because I make all those arrangements in advance. So from a tactical standpoint, I don't actually know. I used to say, oh, we'll meet in the lobby of the Hilton or we'll meet on the first floor by the exhibit hall. And I think that people forget about the topics. I think that the logistics of this experience are going to be pretty interesting. So maybe that'll be something I'll try to share. I'll try to go there in advance and
it's,
share that because I think that might be really helpful or
you should
somewhat
do
helpful, I
that.
hope. In terms of topics, I mean to move away from that, but I obviously I you're confident that it will be mostly AI all the time. And even when you and I have these conversations with people and we say, all right, let's move off the AI topic and let's try to go to, there's always, well, AI is helping us do that. And you really can't get away from it because it's now touching all these different aspects. The ecosystem will be a topic in terms of what are you what technology are you using? Are you finding deficiencies? Are you finding advantages? Is there something more that we should be using? Can we take advantage of an existing tool in a way that we aren't familiar with? And those kinds of topics will be really interesting. I think that you'll maybe start seeing more knowledge sharing about deployment of tools that for a multifaceted series of purposes. I think that people are trying to figure out how to move away from a single tool for a single problem and figure out, wow, this is a pretty versatile tool. How can we use that? And how can we rapidly bring our teams up to speed so that they can apply it immediately to gain instant value?
And it will be interesting because it's still a lot of e-discovery. Legal Weeks always has been, always probably will be. I remember it being in the early days of Gen AI, if we can say that. At least now it's so old. Um, it was really, there's some really interesting. The e-discovery, they've always been a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of leveraging AI. It'll be super interesting to see what product launches. People save it for Legal Week. I bet you there'll be like a heavy focus on agentic. We'll be sort of unpicking what that really means and how developed it is. And as usual, there'll probably be some very cool developed products, and there'll be some that are more still conceptual, like that's always the way. So that would be kind of fun to have a look at some of the announcements during the conference.
And it'll be interesting to see which tools are not historically associated with e-discovery, for example, that are now being used. I mean, I'm about to start my research for my annual e-discovery unfiltered report, where I ask about a whole basket of vendors in the e-discovery sector, services providers and technology providers. And people have asked me this year for the first time to include legal AI tools or other non-historically e-discovery associated applications in this research to try to perform more of a competitive analysis and to try to just sort of gain some more feedback from buyers about where they're using which tools. So that crossover is probably going to be a bit of a conversation at Legal Week as well.
Interesting. And obviously we'll be there, like, potentially having a roving microphone conversation, which
I can
if
only
I
wait.
remember my
Giant
mic.
microphone and little microphone all meshed into one. Caroline Hill, it's always a privilege. I hope that the next time I see you, neither of us is wearing a warm hat and that it's just beautiful weather and I can only imagine. So anyway, thank you so very much.
Thanks, Ari.